Normally, when a game is dead and buried, it doesn't get a second chance at life. But with the recent Edge Runner series, it seems like Cyberpunk 2077 has gotten that chance, almost 2 years after its fateful release. And so I decided to jump back in the game to see if it was worth playing and give my thoughts on the current state of the game, for both new and returning players. So the first thing I did when I jumped back into my old save file was check out how the game ran and felt after all this time. And more importantly, I wanted to check out any new game content on offer. Not surprisingly, the game feels a lot better today, and it certainly has a lot less bugs. Being a day one player, I haven't forgotten how buggy and unstable the game was on all platforms, especially the consoles. Today, the game runs pretty well, and I experienced far fewer bugs in the days I played. It wasn't entirely repaired, the game still has a lot of bugs, in fact, some of the same bugs I experienced when the game came out, like how I can't talk to Mitch here to advance this quest, or how Lizzie has refused to call me back for this mission despite me waiting over 20 in-game days. Damn, Lizzie, how much time do you really need? But in general, the game runs pretty well and it never crashed on me. Night City is also very, very beautiful. Night City was always one of its best features, and the art style is something you won't find in any other game. One of the first things I did was walk around the Kabuki Marketplace at nighttime, and let me tell you, it is really, really gorgeous. The game overall still has that incredible color range and lots of cyberpunk elements like digital poster boards, graffiti, and cyberware. These things make the game stand out against the other generic open world games for sure. The scale is also pretty terrific, as you can often look up to the sky and see these giant high-rise corporate buildings dwarfing the horizon. The game is a little bit empty at times, being an open world. You expect a lot more activities to find and for the game to feel, alive. In fact, the game doesn't really shine as an open world. Don't expect a Grand Theft Auto experience here, and don't expect much role-playing either. Cyberpunk is an action loot shooter with light RPG elements and few major choices. Like the world, the RPG elements are more of a backdrop for the characters and the story, but the aesthetics themselves are wonderful. They are truly wonderful. You can get lost in Night City's dense streets, and I recommend turning off the entire HUD to give yourself the most immersive experience possible. Don't worry, you can still find your way around with this setup because quest and custom map markers still show up in the world as 3D objects, even with the HUD disabled, so you always know which direction to go. If you can train yourself to stop staring at quest markers in your map, learn the city, and, feel it. It's a much more rewarding playstyle than, playing the game on autopilot. For as long as the game has been out, however, I was still a little bit disappointed to find pretty much no new main missions. With the recent 1.6 update, there's been a few gigs thrown into the mix, which were pretty fun, but they don't take but a few minutes of your time, even on hard difficulty. They're not main missions. It's no surprise they're saving the main story missions for DLC, mostly because the game needed to be repaired from the ground up. No surprise there. This is actually one of my main takeaways from playing Cyberpunk today. If you've already beaten the game, there's actually not much reason to go back and play. New Game Plus doesn't exist either. Talents have been swapped around and the AI has been improved. You'll also find some new clothes and some new weapons. And there's some apartments to rent, but there's no new story arcs and nothing has changed from the base game fundamentally. So you really should wait for the DLC to drop if you've already completed Cyberpunk 2077. That's what I'm kind of trying to get at. However, if you're new to the game, I think you should buy this game now. It's definitely worth it. Truth be told, I started a new game fresh just for this video, and I was reminded how fun Cyberpunk can be if you go in with the right attitude. I've always been under the impression that the gameplay, the characters, and the story of this game were pretty solid. I personally don't like the Silverhand angle, and I would have structured the game a lot different, but the story is unique and it's fun despite its problems. The gameplay is also much better than people give it credit for. It's not groundbreaking, but it is a far cry from other lukewarm RPG shooters because it has a lot of variety, and the mechanics are for the most part pretty satisfying. A lot more feedback should have been introduced to melee animations, but if you want to play like an assassin, you can play like an assassin. If you want to be a hacker, you can be a hacker. And if you want to go big dick mode, you can go guns blazing. There's a frenetic pace to the combat if you approach it like a traditional first-person shooter, and this is actually what I've always liked about the combat. It just feels pretty cool to be able to cloak yourself, slow down time, slide, double jump, hack, and punch the shit out of stuff while bullets fly past you. It's just very satisfying. The new weapons are also pretty fun. The animations they added to the katana help give more variety to melee combats, and the new knife throwing mechanic adds a much-needed layer to impromptu play. Overall, it's simply a pretty fun gameplay system that gives you a lot of freedom to approach it however you want to. Other improvements have been made as well to help clean up the play experience, and for me, the biggest one was better artificial intelligence. I can't explain how bad the AI was at launch, and now the people of Night City actually react to you, and in some ways, they act independently. The people on the streets thankfully aren't calibrated like a hive mind anymore, now having more conditional behaviors based off of what you do to them and kind of where they're at in relation to you. They'll run in different directions, they'll bump into you, hell, they'll even run over you if you're in the middle of the street now. You can still hold up traffic if you really want to, but overall, people act much more naturally in the game now. And I can't overstate how important this was to this open world game. For the longest time, people have always been a simple backdrop in these types of games, but when GTA made people act like actual people, things were changed forever. Cyberpunk will never be on the level of Red Dead Redemption 2, though it should have been, and that's definitely a strike against the game. You cannot excuse the de-evolution of open world AI present in this title, but that's not to say that the people of Night City are robots anymore. Night City does feel alive today, maybe not in the way we all imagined, but things have certainly improved in this capacity. To be critical though, the game is still far from being perfect, as there are certainly best ways to play Cyberpunk in terms of combat, and the melee gameplay is often very slippy and very button mashy. Content as well feels oddly distributed across the map, with some areas being far less dense than others. You can really tell that some of the areas got a lot of love when they were developing them, and some not as much. Obviously areas like Pacifica and even Santo Domingo and Haywood. This was and is still the case. Very little, if any, improvement has been made to gigs, contracts, or finding new gameplay across the map in a consistent regard. Thankfully, CDPR has cleaned up the minimap, so exploration is far less annoying when you're driving around. And speaking of driving, the new driving system is a lot better than it was. Controlling your car is no longer an exercise in having a seizure, though to be honest, it's still a little bit too janky. I've always been a fan of immersion in games, and as such, I love driving in first person, but unfortunately that's almost impossible in Cyber, thanks to the jerky handling and how the dashboards of expensive cars block out like half of your screen. I would really love to see this fixed. Still, the game is worth your time. The quiet moments of Cyber are where it shines, especially the conversations and the character interactions. It's really a shame that the life path system was so poorly thought out. I really think that could have been the game's ace. But again, it's in your best interest to approach Cyber as a futuristic storytelling action game rather than an actual RPG. You'll find a lot to hate about the game if you don't, whereas you'll find a lot to love about it if you do. Overall, the game has terrific writing, and going back to the game after a few years, it still holds up pretty well. No, it's not the industry's magnum opus of the decade, but the bones of it are pretty damn well made. One thing that has always stood out to me in Cyber was the excellent voice acting and attention to detail. While some character arcs don't get wrapped up properly and some characters don't get enough time in the limelight, Cyber has great characters and a city worth exploring, even if it's not the game you thought it was going to be. Almost 2 years later, Cyberpunk 2077 provides us with an eerily thought-provoking case study. Cyberpunk was lacerated more than any game I've ever seen, and you couldn't go 5 seconds on your phone without seeing yet again another Cyberpunk hit piece. People love to watch the world burn. The truth is, hating things is almost a commodity business these days because a lot of money gets made from it. People love seeing things destroyed, so people act to destroy them so that other people can watch things getting destroyed. The entire thing is funded by views, so the more people that want to see the world burn, the more money gets introduced into the system to make the world burn. It creates a systematic chain reaction because it creates its own revenue streams, becoming a self-generating machine. And when one person does it, everyone does. We know this because when someone makes money in this world or receives attention, everyone follows suit, thus creating a vicious, endless cycle. Cyberpunk 2077 was engulfed in one of these cycles for years, yet people are slowly coming around to the fact that it's actually a fairly decent game. Not incredible, and not a masterpiece, but at least a pretty good game. And the really ironic part is, not much has fundamentally changed, if at all. The story is the same, there's basically no new content, the gameplay has not changed, life paths were never redone, and the story, the characters, and the choices are all the same. The only things that have been fixed are technical systems that make the game run smoother and make more sense. This should tell you everything you need to know. Cyber was always a pretty solid game despite the crazy amount of problems it had. People just had a hard time seeing it because, well, people love to see the world burn. Anyway, do I recommend Cyberpunk 2077 right now? If you're a new player, then yes, Cyberpunk is actually a pretty fun game. It has a lot of issues and it's pretty short. The open world isn't utilized enough, but it's fun, it's beautiful, and it's very interesting. And when you're done, you can download some pretty cool mods like making your car fly. If you can pick it up for like 40 bucks or so, it's a steal. But even at 60 bucks, it might be worth the asking price if this is the kind of game you're really interested in. If you're a cyber vet, however, and you've already finished the game, then no, you don't need to go back to Night City. You won't find much to tide you over. Hey guys, thanks for watching. I'll be keeping my eye on Cyberpunk 2077 as the new DLC drops at some point. Hope you have a good one, and I'll catch you guys in our next video. Peace.